Have you ever witnessed someone say, "If you don't like it, leave," and everyone left? What was the story? Story 1. Every year, the military has this event they host named the Warrior Games. It's like the Olympics for men and women who were injured while serving. I'm a decent cyclist, so I was selected to represent the Marine Corps team in that event. I'm not sure where they hold the event these days, but the year I was selected, they flew us out to Colorado Springs. When I got there, I quickly realized that 99% of the Marines competing were still on active duty. I had retired a few years prior, so it was weird being around Marines again. Almost immediately after arriving, the senior leaders and officers in charge began demanding that I get my hair cut and shave my beard. At first, I laughed it off and I thought they were joking. Turns out, they were quite serious. The lady who was in charge of the Marine team was a major, and she took me off to the side and ordered me to get a haircut. I reminded her that I had retired a few years prior, was no longer required to abide by active military grooming standards. Then a light bulb went off in her head, and with a smirk, she said, "Well, you either get a haircut or you can go home. Your choice." So I smirked back and said, "Guess I'm flying home." They had already pre-purchased our plane tickets home, so all I did was call Delta and explained what happened, and the lady on the other end transferred my ticket to a flight home the next day. I had taken a few weeks off work to attend this event, so I just went back home and enjoyed my time off with my hair and beard. You have no power here. Story 2. At a former industrial job, I used to have said that during an all-hands meeting. We were understaffed, underpaid, and overworked, and everyone knew it. Instead of the 2-to-1 ratio of 2 machines to 1 operator for safety reasons, we'd have 4, 6, 8 because people were just getting paid less than most retail jobs to bust their asses in some of the most disgusting work I've ever done. You'd come home covered in moldy coolant, metal shavings, and stink. Machines started breaking down because they'd never shut them down to perform maintenance on them, so we'd often have massive problems, which of course meant even more overtime to make up for the broken machines, and people started quitting. Management's response was to tell us that they expected us to work harder because they couldn't get more help. One of my coworkers, who generally gave no fucks, asked in front of everyone in that room why they didn't try raising the poor wages and see if they could entice people that way. The response was, "We're not having that conversation right now. If you don't like it, you can quit." Oh, buddy, was that the wrong thing to say. As soon as word got out to the other shifts, what can only be called a exodus began. We lost half of each shift within the week. I stuck around for a few more weeks until I had a conflict with my schooling at the time, since one of my classes got out about 30 minutes before my shift. 30 minutes away, so I warned them in advance that I might be a few minutes late one day a week, maybe, and got told that I needed to decide what was more important, my school or my job. So I quit and giggled my ass off at the sign in the HR office that said we had an almost 80% turnover rate. Never did find out what happened to that hellhole, but I can't imagine anything good with losing that many people. The poor HR rep seemed like she was just so done with everything and seemed so very apologetic as she took my badge. Story 3. My great-grandmother is notorious for being a mean old bitch. It was Thanksgiving at her house and much of the extended family was there. She started harping on my mom's cousin for something like she always does, and my mom's cousin was like, "Grandma, can't we just have a nice dinner for once?" And great-grandma was like, "If you don't like it, leave." And every last cousin, aunt, uncle, and all their food disappeared to my aunt's house. Lol. Story 4. When I was a kid, I stayed at a friend's house for the weekend. My friend's mother was one of those parents who, at the dinner table, require their kids to eat everything on their plate come hell or high water. I had been served way too much food and said that I can't eat it all. The mother said to me, "You can either finish your food or leave the table." I promptly left the table. Now, this totally blew the minds of my friend and his siblings. It had never occurred to them that leaving the table was actually a viable option. When my mother picked me up the next day, my friend's mother told her what had happened and said I was the rudest little boy. I think my mother was actually quite proud of me. Story 5. Not exactly, but my sister had a habit of picking fights with people, and when it wasn't going her way, she'd tell them she was removing them from her life. She'd done it to boyfriends, longtime friends, sorority sisters. She did it to me twice. The first time, I rolled my eyes because she was younger than me. After the second time, my sister told me, "I'm removing you from my life. You're toxic," and unfriended me and told the family I was toxic. In reality, that wasn't letting her be toxic, selfish, and under the influence of whatever she was on with, to me, spouse, or my kids. so she decided it was a good idea to threaten us. I said, okay, fine. Per her usual routine, after a few weeks, she came around and wanted to pretend she never said the things she said I didn't respond. She claimed it all was a joke and had a right to be in my kids' lives. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. I honestly do not miss her drama, and it was the best decision for my family. It highlighted how bad the generational dysfunction was in my family and how it was expected to just overlook bad behavior for everyone else's comfort. I realized that I didn't want my kids to repeat that cycle. I vowed to always put my kids first. I'm not popular in my family right now, but I've never been happier, and this was the first year I got to enjoy the holidays without having panic attacks or dread. When someone walks out of your life, let them. Story 6. I was the whistleblower at my workplace. I witnessed my manager mentally and physically abuse a 101-year-old woman. I worked in a care home. I raised the alarm, and staff above the manager didn't deal with things quickly enough and over-worry about a bad name. Press had gotten a hold of the story. They were just trying to keep it quiet and were going to allow this manager back to work on a final warning. We were a small team, about 8 of us. When they told us that, all of us reached into our bags and threw our notices at them. It was all of us or her. A week or so later, and then paying her £15,000, she was gone. The worst thing is, we were a charity care home, and she basically got thousands and thousands of pounds for abusing a vulnerable elderly woman. Story 7. My aunt's 40th birthday. It had been a long day, and we were set to eat dinner, but she decided that she wanted to open gifts. My mom tried to explain that everyone was hungry and to just wait until we were done eating, or at the very least until everyone had a plate. She starts getting pissy and saying that it's her day and that if we don't like it, we can leave. Now my dad, not too fond of my aunt for reasons I won't get into here, gets up and walks out. Well, this starts a chain reaction. The only people left were my mother and grandmother. My aunt starts yelling and getting upset, to which my grandmother replies, "Baby, don't be a bitch." It's been 10 years and she's never acted that way again. Grandma out here serving roast. Story 8. New management was hired and took over scheduling from me, who was covering for a now-gone manager, without understanding any of the intricacies of scheduling. After 2 weeks, we had an all-staff meeting to address grievances based on her incredibly poor method of scheduling, and she refused to back down, dropping the famous ultimatum. Out of a staff of 40 or so employees, I think maybe half a dozen stayed. Story 9. Yes, or pretty close to it at least. I was a founding member and treasurer of a skydiving society at my university in Aberystwyth. I myself am teetotal, but I still went out on the weekly social nights, which in Aberystwyth were just spent in the local bars and pubs, as there is nothing else to do there at night. I am pleased to say that my owning a car, so giving people lifts to the drop zone, plus my being teetotal, designated driver, nanny on nights out, plus my house being close to the nearest drop zone, 4 hours away just south of Birmingham, and letting the club sleep there on occasion had made me rather well liked. We went to one of our usual favorite haunts, Lord Beeching's, and only this time the owner was there behind the bar, with one other staff member who looked rather glum, serving and was in a foul mood. All 25 or so of us went in and ordered drinks. He served 23 of us, then ID'd my friend, even though he was clearly over 18, a student, with 24 other students, a regular, the other staff member vouched for him, etc. Made him walk back to the halls to get his passport before he would serve it. This was already eliciting grumbles from the club, but everyone except pubs had to be careful about restrictions and carried on. Then I asked for a glass of water, which he was legally required to provide, I might add. He replied, "I'm not muddying my glasses for some prick who isn't paying." I simply raised my eyebrows, as I had never encountered such a response to a request for a glass of water before. After a moment for it to set in that this guy wasn't making a weird joke, he really wasn't going to give me a glass of water, I turned around to the room of 24 other people, I swirled my finger in the air and said, "Skydiving club, drink up. This won't serve me, so we're leaving." Everybody drank up immediately, and we all left. The skydiving club never went there again whilst I was a member, and everyone else I told the story to avoided as well. Story 10. I had an insufferable supervisor once, and we'd have these 15-minute pre-shift meetings. The dude would just stand in there and lord over everybody for the duration and talk about how bad we were doing. The phrase, "we suck," was one of his favorites. Finally, one day, he's really on one and summons the testicular fortitude to say, if you don't like it, there's a door. His second in command got up, said, "Fuck this," and walked out. He stood there, stunned for about 5 seconds, and then ran out the door after him. He later ended up having some mental instability and quitting. The second in command is now the supervisor. I survived all of those meetings by default, assuming he wasn't talking to me. Story 11. It was a typical 80s teenager house party. I don't even remember how we ended up at this guy's house, but I only knew him by name at school and we'd never hung out before. There was a pony keg and about 15 people there. So far, so good. I remember everyone asking the guy if he had any music. The dude shrugged it off and said, "Maybe later. First, we have to get in the right mindset." He left the room and came back with a Crown Royal bag. Everyone was thinking he was about to twist up a joint. Cool with us. He then pulls out a huge bag of cocaine and starts lining it up in front of us without saying a word. Now, I was okay with a little weed, and I wouldn't care if someone was doing coke in the back room discreetly, but I never did it myself and was definitely not cool with someone having such a large amount in the open. I politely said, "Hey man, that's more of a back room thing." A couple of others around me said something similar and the whole vibe changed. The guy noticed everyone was uncomfortable, but nevertheless said, "It's my house. If you don't like it, you can leave." I'll never forget how quiet and orderly everyone proceeded to leave. I would guess there must have been only 1 or 2 people left. It was awesome. Yeah, for them as well, because they wouldn't have to share. It's a win-win. Story 12. Grade 8 language arts class. To preface this, I was never an aggressive student, generally the teacher's pet, the person who, if a teacher was away for the day, would be tasked in their notes to the sub to be able to assist and give them directions. The time, 20-some odd years ago, shortly after the Columbine shooting. This context is critical to the story. The location, middle of nowhere, Alberta, a small country school. So our regular teacher was out for the day and had left a note directing the sub to ask me if she had questions about what had been covered. Sub comes in, reads notes, and opens the teacher's weekly planner. Then begins writing our words for the weekly spelling test on the board, except she opened the wrong week instead of the current week. She had opened the prior week. At this point, being the goody two-shoes that I was, and much to my classmates' dismay, although a teacher would have corrected us when she was back so it wouldn't have helped them, I raised my hand and politely informed her that I believed she had gotten the page wrong as we previously covered this material. What happened next, I couldn't make up. She lost her crap. She started ranting about how teens in general, and I specifically, were a danger to her, how she didn't know who were her friends and her enemies in the class, we'd never seen this sub before, how she had every right to fear for her life. She then capped it off by saying she was a teacher and if we wanted to think in her classroom, well, there was a door and we were welcome to leave. I was never a popular child, so I wasn't really expecting one of the popular kids, and my sometimes bully, to stand up collectively with everyone else, pull me to my feet, and we all walked out. Now, I mentioned above that we attended a small country school, and there was no place to go, so we just sat in the hallway until the principal came down to chew us out for not being in class. The sub was gone by the start of the next period, and the principal taught the rest of our teachers' classes that day. Story 13. My husband worked at a really toxic job for a while. As staff got fired or quit, they weren't replaced to cut costs, and instead, the remaining 2 employees were worked to death. Finally, the owner, who was a boss and terrible businessman, called a meeting with the 2 to try to force an attitude adjustment. The employees tried to be constructive and talk about things they saw that needed to be improved upon to make things work better, and of course, this egotistical ass owner wouldn't have it. He told them that if they couldn't handle the expectations, that they were free to leave. So they did. Both of them left immediately and never set foot in the store again. I don't think the owner was expecting that at all. He expected them to grovel and beg to keep their jobs and thank him for the opportunity to work 70-hour weeks under his tyrannical rule. My husband called me after that meeting and was so upset he could hardly tell me what happened. He was terrified. He was so sure I would be angry at him for quitting his job when we weren't really in a position where I could support us. I wasn't mad at all. I was so proud of him for not taking the shit that was being doled out to him and doing what is best for his mental health. He's a damn good man and deserved better. Story 14. My old management team had rearranged my whole schedule, made a lot of changes, and took me off one of the areas I worked hard to get into. handing my other project over to newer team members. They announced this at a meeting with everyone present, and it soon transpired I was the only one who wasn't aware in advance of these changes. I went to speak privately with the manager and explained they had changed all my working days and hours and placements without even mentioning it could be a possibility alongside some other things. She exclaimed, "This is your job and you will go where we tell you when we tell you. If you don't like that, then leave." I handed my notice in. They spent a while asking me to reconsider, but to be honest, this was the straw that broke the camel's back, and I'm so glad I left. Although I do remember taking a walk later that evening and thinking to myself, damn, I'm technically unemployed, but I solved it before my notice period ended. Story 15. Okay, maybe not everyone left, but my mother-in-law got me involved in a charity. First, I was a volunteer, then a secretary to the board, and back to volunteering again. Things started changing. People who got on the board were no longer true to the organization's mission and at times ethically challenged. For example, using high school volunteers for the charity in a political campaign, using artwork obtained through contests beyond scope of the contest rules without pay. Anyway, during one of the meetings, which was meant to be planning for a big annual event but was more like hazing to be honest, I asked myself, why the hell am I allowing anyone to treat me like a whipping girl? So I openly asked the board members if this tone is the new standard of the organization's interactions with people volunteering their time and talent to them. The president told me I was being impertinent and rude, and if I could not stand the heat, to get out of the kitchen, to which I replied that I quit volunteering. He told me then that I had to submit my resignation in writing in order for it to be acceptable. So I sat down, scribbled my resignation on a notebook page, and presented him with it. He told me he won't accept it because it was not submitted according to the bylaws. I told him he was incorrect and reminded him I wrote the bylaws. They were too cheap to hire a lawyer to write them, and they clearly state that volunteer resignations do not require board approval. And I left. I was too pissed to drive home, so I went to a cafe across the street. A few minutes later, 2 other longtime volunteers and all the high school volunteers walked in. They all did quit effective immediately as well. The annual event did not take place. The board was sued by the entity it was supposed to be solely supporting for mismanagement and misappropriation of funds. The charity was later involuntarily dissolved by the state due to reporting failures. Custodian was appointed and allocated the remaining funds. In hindsight, it was the right time to jump ship. For me, the best part was the board let the insurance lapse, guess who normally kept track of the renewals, so the legal expenses and part of the judgment went out of their own pockets. Talk about the heat in the kitchen. Story 16. I don't know if this counts, but this happened with my siblings and me and my mom. She was a terrible parent, not abusive enough to get child services fully involved, but they had visited the house a few times. Wonder how much abuse kids have to endure before they get off their ass, but apparently being raped by your stepdad isn't a cause for alarm. She always had an "if you don't like living here, move out" attitude, so as soon as my siblings and I were able to, we moved out. We unfortunately don't get along at all. One of us became a perpetrator in the abuse, another stuck too close to home for me to risk further contact. But the eldest of us left in their early 20s, the middle child left about as soon as they graduated, moved back for a few months but left again, and I moved several states away and never looked back. We all didn't like it and left, and yes, our mom frequently tries asking why. She asks the middle child the most as she's the only one who keeps contact with her mom. I cut her off years ago, as did the eldest. As if 18 years of abuse isn't good enough reason to say, "F it and dip." Story 17. From 1996 to 1999, I worked for Burger King. It was my first job and I stayed because they were close to home, my friends worked there, and they were very accommodating for my school and then university schedule. At one point, they fired our favorite manager, Kevin. We were never really told why. He was just gone one day. They replaced him with a complete turd of a human. The turd started forcing us to sell food that our policy said was too old to sell. He cut down on ketchup portions for carry-out fries. He started short-staffing us so things were getting cleaned correctly. Scheduled students when they had class, just a general jerk who didn't know what he was doing. Burger King didn't realize Kevin had an entire well-oiled crew who was loyal to him. They told us to deal with a new manager instead of trying to fix his issues. So we left, all of us. The entire crew saved a few night shift closers who had to have a job within walking distance from their apartments. Kevin became the store manager of a newly opened pizza place and needed to hire a whole crew. The good news for him is he didn't have any trouble finding people that were good at what they were doing and worked well together. So that was the day I went from Burger Maiden to Pizza Princess. Stayed there for 3 years too, until I got through college. Story 18. I have a couple that immediately came to mind. I was in college and on the cheer squad. I was working retail part-time. I asked my boss to work around my cheer schedule. He refused because cheerleading is not a sport. He was working around other employees' extracurriculars. He said that if I didn't like it, leave. I said okay. He backpedaled so fast, kept the job, and was able to cheer. Another job. I was up for a big promotion. I was told it was mine. And at the last minute, my boss gave it to the woman who worked under me because the boss heard a rumor I might be moving within the next year. Boss didn't talk to me or question the validity of the rumor. It wasn't true. Went to the boss's office and she was a complete witch about it. She said, if you don't like it, leave. So I did. Right then, I can still see the look on her face. It left my team in a bind. She was not expecting me to just walk out right there and then. I found out later that the person who got the promotion wasn't working out and that several of our clients with who I had established relationship jumped ship because they didn't like the other person.